So, welcome to today's webinar. APIs mean business. How AFS transformed testing without adding headcount. AFS stands for Automated Financial Systems, and we're going to learn more about them later, not too much later. But first things first, let's introduce ourselves. I'll start on the right-hand side, and then Gus, David, I'll bring you guys in. But my name is Joe. I'm a product marketing manager here at SmartBear. I've been with SmartBear for just over 7 years. For a lot of that time, I was a solutions engineer, so I worked pretty hands-on with our users and customers of our API testing and API design tools and helped them to kind of get the most out of the solutions. Recently made the jump into the dark side, now work in product marketing. And I'm very happy to be joined today by Gus and David from AFS. So Gus, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, I've been part of our testing team here under Dave for 15 years. I just celebrated my 15 years about 3 days ago. So I've had some quality time here at AFS, and I'm very excited about today.
That's good stuff. Congratulations, Gus. Did you do anything to celebrate?
No,
This webinar. This will be the big anniversary occasion. Well, that's great. Thank you, Gus. And Dave, good to have you here with us too.
Yes, my name's Dave Horger. I've been with AFS for 28 years as of just a few days ago. And I've pretty much managed the testing QA group for the past 22 years. Prior to that, I was a business analyst.
That's great, Dave. Congratulations to you too. Anniversaries all around.
September's a busy month.
It certainly is. It certainly is. Housekeeping out of the way, this webinar is being recorded. So whether you're joining now or whether you weren't able to join, you will get a recording of the webinar in the next couple of days. If you have any questions at all, if you could please add them in the Q&A panel, which Zoom helpfully hides a little bit compared to the chat option. But if you could put them into the Q&A channel, that would be very helpful because it means, if we want to follow up with anyone or get around to some questions we didn't get to answer live, that we'll have that stored. And please answer the poll questions if you don't mind, please and thank you. That would be very helpful. There'll just be one. And quickly run through the agenda. First of all, we'll be doing a little introduction to who AFS are and what they do, and then a bit of an introduction to ReadyAPI. After that, we'll have a discussion. Myself and Dave and Gus will talk a little bit about how AFS did indeed transform their API testing and regression testing without having to add more engineers and more headcount to the equation. And then we will have an audience Q&A at the end, but as is always the way with these things, do feel free to pepper your questions into the Q&A as we go. Sam and I will be here to take a look at the chat. So if anyone has any questions, for us, for Gus, for Dave, by all means, pop them into the Q&A as we go. And Jill, thank you for confirming that you can see my screen. Appreciate that. So one poll to rule them all. What is your biggest API testing challenge today? And a couple of different options there. First option is we're still on the learning curve, just getting started with API testing. Another option is test data management and setup. Third option is integration and dependency management. Fourth option is test automation and maintenance. The last option is something else entirely. And if there is something else entirely, please do feel free to share it in the chat if you'd like. And we'll try and help. So while those questions are being answered, just like a little bit of context, maybe around SmartBear first of all. So, SmartBear, we are a software quality solutions company. So we've got a lot of different tools across the software development lifecycle. We have API testing tools, we have UI testing tools, test management tools. Some of our best known solutions would be the Swagger suite of like open source API tools for API documentation and API design. SOAP UI, which is the open source version of ReadyAPI, which we'll be talking about more today, and Test Complete, which is a UI testing tool. Those would be three of our biggest known solutions, but that's who we are. Like I said, I'm based in the SmartBear office in Galway, Ireland, which is the EMEA headquarters, and then the global headquarters are just across the water in Boston. So that's a little bit about SmartBear generally, and then more on ReadyAPI later. Actually, you know what? More on Ready API now. We've only got 45 minutes, so let's make the most of it. And as I was saying to Gus and Dave just before we kicked off, if you only remember one thing from this webinar, let it be this page. So Dave very kindly shared with me some data around the success that AFS have had with Ready API in recent years. And we can see here a couple of nice numbers, but Dave, you know them better than I do. So I might ask you to maybe just take me through this in a little bit more detail to make concrete the impact that Ready API has had on your testing.
Absolutely. And thank you everyone for joining. First, let me give you a little background on AFS. We're a commercial and accounting software system, and we're in primarily a lot of the top 100 banks within the United States. We have a product, what we call AFSVision, and that's where we're using this ReadyAPI tool to test against. So the numbers that are up on the slide, I just used a comparison from 2024 to 2025 year to date. It just shows you the number of executions runs that we've created. Obviously, there was 156 in 2024, and we're only through September, and we already have 154 execution runs. And that's because we have more clients that have onboarded and started using our AFSVision product. What I did from a justification standpoint to justify the cost of ReadyAPI, and our return on our investment using the tool, every time that we used to do testing, it was all manually, and we wall clocked the time to do the testing. So that's where we came up with, what it would take to do an execution run from a manual perspective, X number of hours. Then we built, Gus came into my office and pitched, let's build automation around our ReadyAPI, using API testing. So we came in and Gus built the product using ReadyAPI, our suite. We execute each month on a monthly basis. Gus has an event that we run every first Tuesday of the month. And then every time that there is a code deployment into one of our customers' SIT environments, we execute the full suite of the API testings that we're doing. So that's where we came up with the number of hours that it took to execute those automation runs. So you can see that instead of 2024 was, if we did it manually, it would be 2,274 hours. From an automation perspective, it only took us 115 hours to run the executions. So that was the savings of about 1,812 hours. So far this year, we're over 2,000 hours. The cost savings, I just times that by our blended hourly rate for an employee. So say $110. That came up with the cost savings. So again, I use that for the justification for the renewal with our executive management team to show the value that we're getting with the tool. We primarily have been doing 3-year renewals for the past couple renewal periods. We use a mix of floating licensing and fixed licenses. We have one floating. We just started using that this year, and that is primarily due to the automation. You have to have a floating license to be able to put that on a VM. So that drove us to get that floating license. And again, our clients are using it primarily from a banking perspective for things like online banking, their online banking portal, where they want balances and stuff like that. So they use an API, inquiry API, to get that information. They also use it feeding into the AFSVision product, booking loans. So they'll use an outside system, and I'm just going to pick one, no plug, no information here, but let's say Encino, right? They're primarily the front end, and they'll feed through their middleware into our AFSVision product using APIs to seed all the information as it relates to that particular work package or loan that they want to board into the AFSVision system. The advantage of testing from an automation perspective, in my view, is it's predictable. It's always the same execution being done versus someone was doing something manually. It's, they could do something different. So it's always predictable. It's reliable. You get a cost savings, as you can see on this slide. And we enjoy the product.
That's great. That last bit is key as well. I think, it's great to know that people actually enjoy using it, and it's relieving headaches rather than creating headaches. But that's great, Dave. Thank you for the rundown.
Yep.
One thing I wanted to maybe explore in a little bit more detail is, um, in my role as an SE, I've had many conversations with teams who say they're doing manual API testing, and then sometimes that might mean they're using some API client tool, or it might mean they're using like a curl command in their terminal. Like, I'm curious about, what did manual API testing look like in AFS before ReadyAPI?
Gus, do you want to answer since you kind of built what we did?
I mean, we've since our initial SOAP services that we deployed, we've been using the SmartBear product. I think it was SOAP UI. I'm not sure if the branding name changed, but I'm pretty sure we used the SOAP UI paid version at one point. And we've been pretty loyal to the product. And as Dave talked about, when we went through some renewal processes, we had to go see other vendors. And I mean, we were very happy with the product offering. Currently today, we do have some manual testing, and we do use curl commands. There are some browser inquiries in certain environments and some of our dev environments that we use for some of the basic gets. But most of our manual testing is still done with the ReadyAPI.
Understood. Yeah, I think back when it was known as SOAP UI Pro, way back way back in the day. No, that's great, Gus. Thank you. Like, yeah, it's interesting that even something like manual testing could mean different things depending on who you're asking. And yeah, it's definitely possible to do manual testing with ReadyAPI or with other tools. Kind of put in your endpoint, send a request, and inspect the data that comes back. But as we'll talk about a little bit later, the real good stuff happens when you start to put those test suites and those kind of execution steps into a pipeline. And more on that a little bit later. The one other thing I wanted to ask you, Dave, was, you said you've been with AFS, 28 years, and the ReadyAPI usage in AFS naturally is focused on testing your APIs. And as you were talking earlier about some of the use cases that your clients have for your software, you mentioned them also using APIs to kind of seed data and populate the tool. And I was just wondering if, in the 28 years you've been with AFS, have you seen like, a rise in APIs in general, like on kind of both sides of the equation? Have they become a bigger part of your architecture internally, or is it just that people are talking about them more now?
No, they've become a bigger part of our architectural, and the use of APIs industry-wide is becoming more prevalent as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's definitely what we're seeing as well. Is I think a lot of organizations are starting to realize that they're sitting on a lot of value with some of their internal, you know, functionality maybe that they had developed initially as an internal use case, and they realize, hey, there's actually value here that we could like productize this API, or this is something that we could, monetize or expose externally and have other kind of developers and other organizations come in and plug into it.
And a lot of our clients, they have a middleware where they feed into, and then they go from there, from that middleware. That's what
Yeah.
we've seen working with the banks that we deal with.
And then for the uninitiated, the somewhat uninitiated like myself, what's the elevator pitch for, if someone asks you, hey, what's AFS Vision for? Like who is sitting down and using AFS Vision, and what's the use case for the product?
It is a commercial loan accounting software system. Like I said in the beginning, it's for boarding commercial loan accounting. We also have other tools. We have a credit risk navigator product. We have some business intelligence tools, pricing tools that we share also with our clients. So again, it's all around the commercial loan accounting and the loans being booked on the system.
No, that's interesting. Thank you, Dave. Thanks for the explanation. So Gus, I wanted to talk to you for a couple of minutes about maybe more on the tool side, more on the implementation side of ReadyAPI. And then maybe what I'll do just maybe for people who are less familiar with ReadyAPI, and Gus is going to share a screen a little bit later and we can take a look at it. But high level, ReadyAPI it's a desktop application. It's an on-prem tool in that sense, and it's got three main modules in there. There's a functional testing module, there's a performance testing module, there is an API virtualization module. So it's a little bit of a platform in that sense. There's a lot you can do with it. The product has been around for a while, so it's matured a lot in recent years, and it's a bit of a Swiss Army knife. But that's the tool that we're talking about here is ReadyAPI. And Gus, as you mentioned, you've been users of ReadyAPI for a while, even back as far as when it was called, SOAP UI Pro. But one thing I'd be interested to hear you talk a little bit about is, was there kind of a light bulb moment, in your usage of SOAP UI Pro / ReadyAPI when you realized, hey, we could be doing more with this product than we're actually already doing with it?
Yeah, and we were using the product to test our early SOAP implementations. You guys had a great knowledge base on your website that really took me down a path of, okay, this is what this application can do. So I was like the third man into the API team at the time, and we kind of explored it. I talked to the API lead, and I talked to Dave at the time, and we kind of put together a little proof of concept of what we can accomplish. We knew the challenges of automation. We've talked about it, previously a lot. Maintenance is always like a high cost. So how can we lower maintenance? And if we limit maintenance, how can we still get great tests? So we kind of built our SOAP regression automation suite. It ran great. We ran into some problems such as, I know we've talked privately, but in the accounting world, dates are very important. Our system is very date specific. When you set up billing schedules and payments, they need to be on certain dates, because you can't post a payment to a date on a loan that's not effective yet, or has already matured. Things like that. That there's some logic rules. So when we transferred more into our REST services, we explored some more of the features that you guys offered, such as like the Groovy scripts, and we were able to hook that into our automation and allow us to get solid concrete dates that worked well in our test suites.
That's very interesting. I remember when we talked about that, the script to generate the today's date plus 30 days seems like such a small thing on its own, but when you scale that across like multiple executions of a regression test, or multiple people having to hard code that into their tests or just figure it out manually, you can really see how, as someone who demos ReadyAPI a lot, we don't always spend a lot of time on the Groovy scripting functionality, but it was really interesting to hear that this is actually a specific thing that really helped you guys out in this instance.
Yeah, it allowed us to cut down on time, because we used to have testers go in and prep the data before running the tests. So we no longer needed to prep that data. And that was a huge time saver and a huge headache for us.
Yeah, sometimes it's the simple things. One thing before I get you maybe to share your screen for a few minutes, I wanted to go back maybe just to one thing you mentioned there about, you said when we decided to move more to REST from SOAP. And I think anyone who's in the world of APIs, I'll put it to you this way, probably one of the search terms that results in a lot of traffic for one of our pages of documentation is SOAP versus REST, right? Still to this day, for as long as I've been with SmartBear, people are still kind of interested in like, what is the difference between these two things? When would I use a SOAP API versus a REST API? And I was wondering if, was the move from SOAP to REST, or at least maybe put another way, was the AFS starting to develop more REST services than SOAP services? Was that motivated by something internally? Was it like the introduction of maybe a new part of the AFSVision product, or just generally be curious to hear about like, how was the move from SOAP to REST within AFS?
I think from a technology standpoint, we wanted to make the decision to go to REST. Our chief technology officer, as part of the product, wanted to make the shift from SOAP to REST. So that's what do it. We still support some of our clients that still have some legacy SOAP services, but they are also in the process of migrating them from SOAP to REST. I see that mostly in the industry. Everyone kind of migrating or moving from SOAP to REST at this point.
Yeah, it did kind of, it seemed like a little bit of a groundswell where all of a sudden everyone was doing it. And sometimes if you ask why, it was almost like a non-question, like, well, why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we move from SOAP to REST? And like, yeah, obviously in a lot of ways it's a superior approach for a lot of use cases. No, thank you, Dave. So Gus, I was wondering maybe if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen and we could take a little bit of a closer look at your setup in ReadyAPI. And for anyone who's curious about the results of the poll from earlier, which was, what's your biggest API testing challenge? The most responses was for test automation and maintenance. So interestingly enough, Gus and Dave, it resonates with what you were both saying earlier, is that you know previous attempts at automation in AFS were maybe stalled by challenges with automation and challenges with maintenance. So they were the results of the poll. So yeah, for anyone who has not seen ReadyAPI before, this is ReadyAPI. We're looking currently at if you cast your eye over to the left of Gus's screen there, you'll see the project navigator. So the project in this instance is base sit 3.8. And within, everything in ReadyAPI happens within a project. So within one project, you'll have your APIs that you're testing, you'll have your functional tests, you'll have your performance tests, your security tests, and your virtualized APIs. So everything happens within the directory of a project. And in this case, Gus has a regression suite set up. And maybe Gus, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what's happening in this regression suite.
Yeah, so in this regression suite, we go through about 140 of our 300 services, and we kind of run this on the first or second day of our sit builds. We do have another project that has about 300 services that we run monthly, but this one's a little more easier to follow on a demo. We kind of use all of the functions that SmartBear and the ReadyAPI has to offer us. We use some data sources, so we have a collection of Excel files that have specific data for each of our screens. So we import from the Excel files. Like we mentioned earlier, we use some Groovy scripting to create customer names. So when we run our automated tests, we use like a borrowing customer, and then we just put the date. That way, when we go back in later and we need to clean up data, we know what data we can get rid of and what data we can keep if we need to. It helps identifying it, because data quality through testing environments is a huge struggle in most organizations. And I mean, this is what we kind of do to do our part to help out if we do put too much data in an environment. Automated testing does create a lot of data. It fills up those databases rather quickly sometimes. So it's good for us to be able to identify different things. And then, as I talked about earlier, we do some date things, date generation. We just simple stuff today, add a day. And then from there, we take that data and we feed it into our services. And kind of how I want to model it is, if you've ever used like an online banking system, a loan payment system to pay a car loan, when you log in, you see your account number, you see your balance, you see your borrower details, and all of those on screen are pretty much their own web services that we have to support. So we have some basic user provisioning stuff that we test. We go into some creating customers, creating obligors, creating obligations, collateral. From here, these are just basic REST requests. We use property transfers to move data. We have the table here to store the data, and then we write it out to an Excel file. And then at the end of every run, I provide that file to Dave along with the numbers, how long it take, how many test cases we executed, how many failed, and that's what he uses to plug into his spreadsheet to come up with his savings and those pretty numbers that he showed earlier.
No, absolutely. This is really interesting, Gus. Thank you. And I think hopefully this starts to answer a question that we got into the chat there. And Mark had asked, how much have you used Groovy in ReadyAPI to extend and integrate ReadyAPI with other applications? And from what we're seeing here, I think you've made very good use of Groovy here to automate some foundational things that need to happen in lots of different places. Which leads me to something I wanted to talk a little bit about. So if we think of scripting, let's consider scripting here on the more technical side of things, right? The way that I often talk about ReadyAPI on customer calls or demos would be that there's room for many types of users in ReadyAPI. So let's say you're more on the business side of things, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. You can certainly log in into ReadyAPI and create lots of effective tests using the pre-built test steps. Things like property transfers you were talking about there, Gus. There's a lot you can do, and you can write some really good tests with ReadyAPI without necessarily needing to write any scripts. But on the other hand, if you are, let's say, more developer minded or code minded, you can certainly extend the functionality of the tool with GroovyScript, and JavaScript is also supported. But I wanted to come back to something, Gus, that you said on one of our calls, which was that thanks to ReadyAPI, some of your best API tests are now written by business analysts, which to me is the key detail in all of this conversation, because the title of the webinar has that that bit about you were able to do all this without adding headcount. And by that I mean you were able to do this by going to members of the team that were already there and saying, hey, here's a tool that actually enables you to write API tests. You have the knowledge of the business and how all of this is supposed to work. So I'd love to know, Gus, you just hear a little bit about some of those early conversations where you went to say the BAs of the business team and introduced them to ReadyAPI. Was it was it an instant slam dunk where they all had light bulbs going off on their heads and said, oh, of course, this makes perfect sense? Or was there still a little bit of kind of coaching and enablement involved with getting them up to speed and writing these tests?
There was some coaching getting up to speed, but I mean, we got really lucky because a member of our team who helped build some of the REST automation, he went on to become a BA, and he was able to, work with some of his counterparts. I know a couple of them are on the call here, but he was able to work with some of the counterparts, introduce them to some of the tests and things that we created. And from there, they're involved in some of the discovery process and talking to current clients and future clients and really understand how the clients plan to use the system or are using the system. So we were able to go back and tailor our tests more to what our clients are doing, and that's really helped us kind of catch defects, catch things up front, rather than once we're in implementation mode and once we have delivered product to the client. So we've had great success there. Our business team does use these some of these regression suites. They built their own test suites that they use in demos sometimes, and I often tell them, demo our product, don't demo, the tool, because the tool provides us so much ease and so much access that it was very easy to onboard and train the business team to use it.
No, that's great. That's really interesting. And I think that idea of catching bugs earlier, I think when you're in the API testing and software quality assurance space, generally, you almost become a little bit immune to this idea of, bugs become more expensive the later in the process that you catch them. And you almost just become so used to hearing that phrase, you're like, yeah, of course, of course, of course. But it's good to remind ourselves that it's because it's true, that it's less expensive and easier to catch this stuff and fix it ahead of time rather than waiting for it to get into a client implementation. Um, I wanted to talk just a little bit about maybe a little bit more on the automation side of things. So I'll just talk very briefly on um, just from a Ready API perspective, from the product side. I'm sure everyone's eyes are drawn to that. The green play button there up at the top of the toolbar. To run the test. So if Gus clicked that, this regression suite would run within the Ready API user interface. But when it comes to automating these tests, David mentioned earlier about a floating license. So this is how the tool is licensed. And if you have a floating license, that means that you can run these tests headlessly on a virtual machine or, in a Docker container, for example. And that's how you really start to automate these tests. So it's like there's levels of automation. We talked earlier about how manual testing in AFS at one stage was, Gus, if you click on just in the top right there, Endpoint Explorer, and this may well have been like a manual test at some stage, or just there in the very top right in the blue button.
Yeah, I have a lot of stuff covering us. I'm sorry.
Oh no, you're all right. Sorry, take your time. But like just this, for example, a manual test with Ready API might be put your endpoint in here, hit send, and look at the response, right? Kind of level one. Then level two automation would be, Gus, what you have set up here inside the navigator, you've got a string of requests together that's being dynamically populated by data, and you can press play in the application and it runs there while you're watching it. And then level three would be, Gus, what you're doing now with some of your suites, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're using the test runner component in Ready API to basically trigger these suites headlessly without Gus having to, open up the UI here.
Yeah, I
And
mean, we
Gus is,
use this. We
go
kind
ahead.
of go in here to test run and we get this, from a batch. And we put this in a batch file and we have a test scheduler on the VM that runs a batch program and executes the test. When the test is finished, we review the results, send them off to Dave with our metrics, and that's kind of our process.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's still, to this day, it's the most, there's another tool called Test Engine, which is it's like a hosted runner of Ready API tests. So you could spin up Test Engine in some environment and you send your Ready API tests to it via an API, and Test Engine executes the tests. But I think if you were to talk to the bulk of our Ready API users, it's the test runner approach, which is still the most commonly used, which is, as you described, put the test in a batch file, um, and execute it, Jenkins, GitHub, or whatever the mechanism happens to be. But yeah, Gus, that's great. Thank you so much for taking us into the tool and giving us a look at a little bit of a closer look at the implementation side of things. So we're coming up to, we've got about 10 minutes left on the clock officially, and I can see that there's maybe a couple of questions in the Q&A. So I might just grab back the screen share if that's all right, Gus. And for now, what I will do is see if anybody has any burning questions while I take a look at the ones that we already have. So Avishek has said, looks like more of a comment than a question, but that's fine. The Ready API can be set up for learning purposes without a license once the demo is completed and the client is convinced they can purchase the license. You make it sound so simple, Avishek, but you are exactly right. Yeah, you could download a trial of Ready API and kick the tires of it and decide if it's for you. On the other side of that equation, so this is a good question from anonymous attendee. What's the main drawback on SOAP UI that made you switch to Ready API? Now, if I'm not mistaken, Gus, I think maybe some crossed wires here, because if I'm not mistaken, AFS were never using the fully open source version of SOAP UI, right? You've always used some form of the Pro tool, and just back when it was still called SOAP UI Pro. Am I right there, or?
I think we do use the open source tool a little bit.
Cool.
Because we have a limited number of licenses. I mean, licenses is what, big conversation all the time, but
Yeah, of course.
The open source tool is still great. It allows us to execute, manual tests, quick tests, smoke tests, stuff like that. It doesn't have some of the features like the property transfer building, the paths. I guess you have to do some like JSON path work manually, but I mean, we've had success with the free tool as well. I don't think we'd be able to run our current test configuration in the free version. And I hope that answered the question. I
No, that's
apologize.
perfect. That's great, Gus. Thank you. And like for what it's worth, the way that I would always describe it on demos, if someone asks like, "Hey, why would I use Ready API if there's this free version of the tool?" And like candidly, there's nothing in Ready API that you can do that you absolutely cannot do in the open source version of the tool, and that is because the open source tool is very extensible, right? So you can Groovy script the hell out of it, and you can make SOAP UI do whatever you want it to do. And the value in Ready API is, as you described, Gus, we've already done a lot of that heavy lifting for you in terms of property transfers, the data sources, the pre-built test steps, and things like the Git integrations, which I think someone else has asked about down here as well. So it's just like it's SOAP UI but faster. Is
Yeah,
one
and then
way.
Ready API. We'll go. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Gus.
Ready API has really helped some of our non-technical testers. Like, you know, it's their introduction into automation. So we've gotten people who have no technical background, no banking background, and we've gotten them to be able to build automated tests, use Ready API, understand how to use technologies that they're not normally familiar with, the integration to like OAuth and SAML. We use like a private access manager tool to store our secrets and our OAuth tokens. And some of these, non-technical testers they're able to pick up how easy it is to add those credentials in and execute those requests pretty seamlessly. And I think that's really where we see the value in Ready API is with the people that don't have high technology backgrounds.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's great to hear you describe it like that because I've always felt that you know, Ready API is a really good learning tool for a tester who is new to API testing, or it kind of opens up API testing to a wider audience within an organization or a test team. Um, so there's a question here. Like I said, we haven't talked about this yet, Gus, but just curious, if you're using if are you using the Git integration for collaboration? So do you integrate your Ready API tests with any code repositories? Is the question from the audience.
No, we did not. The only thing collaboration wise is we store our tests in Subversion.
Hmm.
So if anyone makes changes, it's a check-in, check-out process. There's a log, but no, we don't have any integrations to Git currently.
No, thank you. And from a technical perspective, like the project we were looking at earlier inside Ready API, like when you save that project, it gets saved as a directory of XML files. So you can put it in a shared directory on like a desktop system, put it in Git with the Git integration, or Gus, as you said, you can store it in Subversion as well. So there's different ways of um building the test into source control management. Um, Another question here from an anonymous attendee. Did you hire someone to do the automation with Groovy scripts, or was it done internally?
Everything was done internally by the
Yeah.
man, Gus, working with other testers. So everything was done internally.
Yeah, that's not entirely true. I mean, we did have a team member, Mike, who I've talked about previously, who went on to be a business analyst. He did the research, learned the Groovy, used
But
your
he was
Google,
an
your Stack
internal
Overflow.
employee.
Yeah, he was internal on my team. But I mean, he kind of did it on his own. We didn't hire outside resource. It was all done internally by our team.
And Gus, you're very modest. Sounds like you're a big part of the success of the tool, but it's also interesting to know that you're able to keep it in-house, right? I think that's a key detail here as well, is that we didn't need to kind of bring anyone in to implement. Uh,
Yeah.
Another question. Oh yeah, go ahead, Gus.
No, I mean that was really my selling point to Dave too when we started. We understand how expensive our development team's time is, right? They're a great resource, but their time's very expensive. So we want to make sure like we're able to do this on our team, right? We can
Mhm.
train, we can use the tools available to us. We can, and learn on our off time from work and all work together to build a tool that'll not only help us but help the company. And that's kind of what the motto and the team we stuck by.
Absolutely. Maybe I have a question around that is, when new people start on the team, do you find people can get started pretty quickly with Ready API? Does it take a little bit of training? And like, be totally honest here. I'm really just curious. Like, for someone who kind of comes in and you say, "Hey, this is a tool that we use," do people generally kind of get it quickly, not so quickly, takes them a long time?
Yeah, so I think we're actually in a strange situation here where we're working on onboarding some new people. So we're working on, how we're going to do this now. But
Yeah, yeah.
in the past, our product is very intensive. It's loan accounting. So there's some knowledge that needs to be learned in the loan accounting portion. But once we kind of get them up to speed on our core application, teaching them the services kind of goes pretty swell. I'm able to give them, inquiry type services to test, and I've had great success there. We talked a little bit about the import project, which is kind of our most intense service. That takes some time because you're dealing with posts and not just gets. Um,
Hmm.
so if they don't have like a technology or coding background, they might not be familiar with payloads and stuff like that. So teaching them that versus just teaching them to Git is has been a little challenging, but everyone seemed to catch on. I haven't had anyone who has had trouble with it after like 2 weeks, so I think that's been a positive. Like I mentioned, we're going to be onboarding some new employees soon with technical backgrounds, so we'll see how this goes with teaching them the web services and Ready API.
Great. That's really interesting. Thanks, Gus.
I might get
And
in
then
trouble for mentioning that, but
One
I
other
don't think
point
so.
I'd like to quickly throw out. So
Yeah, of
everything
course.
that we've talked about here was around quality assurance and regression testing. We also use the product for um, performance testing. We have a group of individuals that does the performance team. They do stress testing and performance testing, and they also use Ready API. So, it's used for both. I just wanted to make sure that I got that out there, so people are aware.
No, thank you, Dave. I appreciate that. And it actually does, it answers there was one or two questions just in the chat there that I was about to jump on around. Um so Peter and another anonymous attendee just asked, number one, if AFS used the performance testing functionality, and then in a wider sense, any of the other modules or integrations within Ready API. So like I mentioned, virtualization, it's got some integrations with like test management tools and API design tools. And I think just curious if they're being used um, within AFS.
Not at this time.
no, I mean we do have some plans to work with Swagger Hub a little more, but it's time resources is always when they become available we can work on more stuff. So there are plans, and we do look at the product offering that you guys offer all the time to see, is there something that could help us, how can it help us, can we save money? So that's kind of the process that we go through. And yeah, we're always looking to add, so if there's any recommendations, I'm always open to taking them.
Yeah, like I suppose the question is, can we make it easy enough so that you don't have to add headcount, right? We have to make it so can everyone take part straight away? It doesn't have to take like a kind of special skill set for it. So the balls in our court on that one. I know we're just slightly over time. I think there was one more question that I just want to get to just out of um just for posterity, and that question was just around the the CI/CD implementation. I know you've kind of referenced it a little bit, but it sounds like it's implemented on a VM. Like, is it a GitHub action, or is there a particular tooling you're using for CI/CD, or is it something homegrown?
Our tests aren't really part of our CI/CD process. We've talked about, they're written and that they're ready to be moved to the left into that process, but currently, we haven't done that.
Understood. Understood. So the kind of the Ready API regression tests are separate to the pipeline for now.
Yes, currently, yeah.
Correct.
All right. Now that makes sense. Thank you, Gus and Dave, and thanks everyone for all the questions. That was great. Sometimes sometimes people aren't feeling too talkative, but everyone was very curious and chatty today. So that's great. Um, right. So like I said, we're just 1 minute over time. So all that's left for me to say, first of all, Gus and Dave, sincerely, thank you both very, very much for joining me today. Um, this is a really interesting conversation. I'm not just saying this, but I've learned a couple of things um, about the kind of concrete hands-on challenges that organizations like yourselves can have with API testing. So it's really interesting, and I hope everyone in the audience learned something as well. And thank you to all of them for joining too. And yeah, we'll see you on the next one. So bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
My pleasure. Bye bye.